Hello everyone, today we're going to look at an argument that I hear from creationists fairly often, and it's starting to irk me. Thus, this video will take a look at why the argument holds absolutely no water. I'm also admitting at the outset that this will be a bit of a rant, so let's jump right in. Creationists love to say that no one has ever demonstrated evolution, that evolution is believed upon solely by faith. However, when you start to explain what evolution is, a combination of mutations, selective and non-selective mechanisms, and speciation, you can pretty easily convince a creationist that all these parts of evolution are observable. Generally, they'll agree. Creationists often have no problem saying that not all mutations are harmful, that natural selection works perfectly well, and that speciation happens. Well, there you go, that's evolution. No, they say, that's microevolution. But you respond by saying that the definition of microevolution is genetic change within a species. Okay, they say, they have no problem with that. They then say that that's the only type of evolution that happens, that macroevolution is impossible. But you push further, pointing out that the definition of macroevolution is genetic change at or above the level of species. Therefore, every speciation event is, by definition, observable macroevolution. Suddenly, the creationist cries foul, you're just using a bait-and-switch tactic to show evolution. Or they say you're playing a word game to show evolution. Now, why is this a laughable argument? We'll take this in three parts. The first point is that an evolutionist invented the words micro and macroevolution, meaning that he got to define them. That person was Yuri Filipchenko in 1927. He gave the word specific definitions, which we still use today over 90 years later. Therefore, evolutionists couldn't possibly be using a bait-and-switch tactic if we're using the same definitions that the originator of the words did. So who's really using a bait-and-switch tactic? Unsurprisingly, it's the creationists, which brings me to my second point. The second point is that creationists are the ones redefining the word macroevolution to fit their narrative. Take this article from the Quad City Creation Science Association titled Bait and Switch Tactic of Evos, Macroevolution. It says, quote, "Change is all around us, therefore evolution is true. This has become an effective bait and switch tactic, especially on students who are captive in a classroom." Close quote. So does this argument hold any validity? Of course not. Interestingly, the article defines evolution quite well for creationists, saying, quote, "In biology, evolution is change in the inherited traits of a population of organisms from one generation to the next. These changes are caused by a combination of three main processes: variation, reproduction, and selection." Close quote. The article then goes on to say that creationists totally accept variation, reproduction, and selection. Then what's the hang-up? The article says that evolutionists are equating this definition of evolution with what the article calls molecules to man evolution. This is equivocation on the creationist part even by the article's standards. They're equating the accepted definition of evolution with what they perceive evolutionists mean when they say evolution. The problem here is that, in this case, evolutionists and creationists are using the same definition of evolution. The creationists are equivocating, and strawmanning I might add, the word evolution with our evolutionary history. So, how do the creationists define micro and macroevolution? Well, like evolution, the article's explanation of microevolution is decent, even though they say, for some reason, that microevolution is horizontal change. It's not. However, they fail spectacularly when it comes to macroevolution. This is their definition of macroevolution. Quote, "This is the ever-increasing complexity of life, the natural development of simple cells, and then invertebrates, then fish, amphibians, and eventually humans. This is what most people think of when we use the basic term evolution." Close quote. Of course, the article doesn't bother explaining what complexity is, or even try to apply the notions they claim to accept to account for that complexity. Saying God did it isn't an explanation. As you can see, the creationist definition of macroevolution is vastly different from the scientific definition of macroevolution. which involves just microevolution piling up over time. They're not alone in this, though. Kent Hovind commonly defines macroevolution as change from one kind to another, as does Answers in Genesis. And, as I've demonstrated in previous videos, such as new kinds, creationists have no consistent definition of kinds, running all over the systematic map. Usually families of organisms, except for us, where our species must be its own kind, no matter what. So, not only are creationists attempting to redefine a word with an already agreed upon and useful definition, but they are also trying to do it using a word that has no working definition. And this brings me to my final point. Why are creationists so concerned with the word macroevolution? According to the definition of macroevolution, this process occurs even if the Earth is only 6,000 years old. Embracing the definition of the word doesn't in any way necessarily prove the evolutionary history of life on Earth over the billions of years. So creationism isn't even affected. We need to get past this issue. Clear evidence exists demonstrating both micro and macroevolution, so the argument needs to move away from these definitions. It needs to move towards discussing evidence for the evolutionary history of Earth, of which there is an embarrassment of riches. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.